I'm Naomi Sternberg. I'm a licensed clinical family therapist from New York State, and I've been in the family systems theory for about 35 years. So I have been studying it and restudying it, and I still have so many questions. But there are basic similarities to what I'm going to talk about the understanding of what dynamics of family systems is. What are family dynamics? It is defined as patterns interrelating between family members. So we see that throughout the families that I have seen and throughout all families, that families relate differently to each other, children to parents, parents to children, and there are differences in all families. Every family is a system. And we see that some patterns are similar, however, some patterns are not. And some similarities are good, some similarities are not good. So they can be adaptive and functional and sometimes maladaptive. So let me explain. Everyone is a product of one's environment and family of origin. The family of origin concept has come along from Carl Hendricks and relational therapy through Terry Real and other psychologists as well. But it's very basic to understand how people behave. Family dynamics have a strong influence on the way the children behave in the future. So in other words, if they're behaving a certain way, that tends to go into their future relationships. Family dynamics include family alignments, hierarchies, roles, and ascribed characteristics. And of course, patterns of interaction between family members. Family dynamics is influenced by many, many things, and I'm only going to go through a couple of them. Through parental roles, parents' relationship, number of children in the family, poverty levels, economic strata, trauma, divorces, death, instability, discipline issues, and there are many, many more, and hierarchies of grandparents, and dynamics of other powers within the family and of course outside the family. Now, a child might unconsciously not realize, or unintentionally realize, he takes on a role as a result of things going on in his family, such as if a child wants to become a peacekeeper only because his parents are not getting along. There's a lot of conflict, a lot of friction, and a lot of disarray in the family, so he becomes a peacekeeper. Now, you might think that's a positive aspect, however. He's adapting to his situation at that point. When he gets older, it may not be the best thing for him in his new relationship. He may become a peacekeeper because he wants to steer the family away from the fighting and the conflict in the family. And he learns that peacekeeping is the way to survive in his family. And it can play out in two ways. He can become very involved in other people's feelings and behaviors and not attuned to his own needs. And I'll tell you about a couple that I had who's the spouse, or the female spouse, the woman, was very angry at her husband because she had grown up in a Middle Eastern family. The culture was very strong, and she was a very hard-headed woman, very tough, she called herself honest and very forthright and very verbal and articulate. And her husband grew up in a very critical home also. However, he played out differently. He played out as a mild-mannered, unassertive, very low-key, very passive. And she complained that he was a wimp. And she wanted a man to run the household, to be assertive. So you see two different families that came from critical families and difficult families landed out to be totally different. And that's what can happen. We don't know the outcome of different families that have different dynamics. We also have a situation where a parent blames a child for too many things and is critical in that way, calls the child a troublemaker and a failure. And this child can play out in two different ways also. The child can become a troublemaker in his future life and be just someone who enjoys company because that's what he was used to. Or he can become the other side and become very, unmotivated and try to make life much better for him and be somebody special, and that does happen. But again, we don't know how it plays out. It has a lot to do with us, something I'll talk about in a few minutes. So I'll tell you a story about a rabbi who had, in the 4th grade, I won't mention his name, because I don't have permission to, and he used to love to write compositions, and the teacher didn't think he was a good writer, and told him that he's never going to write well, and he's never going to be able to write a report well. And in his mind, he said, I'll show you. I'm going to make sure that I will write well. And why did that happen? So first he wrote and wrote and wrote, and he published a book, and he sent it to his 4th grade teacher. So this is the opposite of what could happen when a teacher could say to a child, you don't know what you're doing, you're really a loser, and then the child would say, I won't do it anymore. And then that would stick that child down. So how did this rabbi become so motivated and so encouraged? Well, it has to do with attunement and attachment. So being that his parents were very attuned to his needs and his emotional feelings and his expressions, so he was able to get encouraged and motivated to do what he needed to do. His parents were a big support to him and believed in him and said, you're going to make it, you're going to do it, just keep going, don't give up. He didn't. So that has a lot to do with what's going on in the family dynamics as well. So we see how a family's attitude toward the child influences the child, but we don't know how it influences until, as the years go on, you'll see. And we have people who are criticized for being a loser and a troublemaker, and they play out that particular role. And again, the opposite is they say, I'm not going to be that way, I'm going to show everybody I can do it. So when a parent doesn't attune to that child is feeling less secure, less grounded, and less supported. And that gives the child a lot of feelings of low self-esteem. And parents don't realize it, they may be hurting the child more than they realize it. For instance, if a child is coming home from school and he said, I was kicked out of the class again, if a child sits and listens to the child speak, if the parent listens to the child speak, then maybe the child will tell the parent what's going on. Instead of saying to the child, well, of course you get kicked out. You're always a problem. You're always talking in the middle of class. You're always failing. So of course you're a problem. Maybe the parent has to, not maybe, it's necessary for the parents to listen to the child and hear the child out and let him express emotions. Another thing that's important is to understand that parents need to let a child express emotions. Instead of saying to the child, be tough, don't cry, it's not a manly thing to do, or it's a sissy thing to do, or why would you cry so much? Let the parent, let the child emote and express their feelings in a way that the child will feel validated and heard. We spoke about validation beforehand, and this is really important. It's imperative that the child be heard and feel that he's being expressed, allowed to express his feelings. If he's not going to have the ability to express his feelings, he'll feel that he has to stick them into his gut, which can cause other physical problems as well, not emotional, but only physical and emotional. So when a child is in a crisis family, a chaotic family, or a predictable family, he learns different modalities of how to survive. So they talked about adapting to that behavior. So if he learns to adapt in a way that's negative, like for instance, if he's learned to focus on his own needs and not anyone else's needs, that would be a problem if he got into a future relationship. So he may want to just be very selfish and just, this is what I need and my needs, and when he comes into a future relationship with a spouse, she would feel, the wife or the husband would feel very left out, and that would cause a lot of conflict. Or another family dynamic can occur when the person is self-reliant based on a family that's chaotic and unpredictable, and just saying, you know, I don't need anybody, I can do everything myself, I don't need your help. And the spouse would say, well, I want to be part of this family system. And the other spouse will say, well, I can do it myself, you don't know what you're doing anyway. So that the chaos causes all this confusion. So we learned that family dynamics can cause a child to become, or either way, the adaptive behavior at that point when he's young, or functional or maladaptive behavior when he gets older, and that maladaptive behavior will not help him form new healthy relationships. Now, so let me just talk about how we can get a family to really do well with their children. For instance, listening, as I mentioned earlier, listening is really vital. And I don't mean listening when you have a newspaper in your hand or a telephone or a video or that you're chopping onions or ironing. And you need to listen by looking at the child and looking in his eyes and maybe sometimes holding his hand or holding his shoulder or hugging him. The child needs to feel that mommy and daddy really love me and they really care about me no matter what I'm doing wrong or what I intend to do wrong. So it's important, again, to listen to the child very carefully in order for that child to become grounded. We all know that conflict is very normal in every family. That's the way life is. There's no such thing as a perfect family. We're not a bunch of robots. We are people and with a lot of emotions and a lot of background information and family of origin issues. So how do we work with conflict? Sometimes the conflict can go on for years, but sometimes not. But it is important for a conflict to be resolved, if it can be, not always, but if it can be. And many times it's important not to go to sleep having that conflict. If it's something very simple that can be done throughout a little conversation, then it should be taken care of before bedtime. However, that's not the case, and there are a lot of people involved. It is okay for a parent to say, I'm sorry, I did the wrong thing. It is okay for a parent to say, I'm taking responsibility. What you're doing by doing that is allowing the child to understand that responsibility is a good thing. Taking responsibility is a good thing. And if that's the case, then it's okay, as long as one is not criticized for taking responsibility. If you say that I'm responsible for that plate falling on the floor, it's okay. It happens. We're all human. We need to understand that things do happen in a family that may not be one's fault particularly, but it is something that you need to say, I am responsible. That's okay. The parent is ready to own up on his role, and the child will learn that that's what I have to do. Because many children, on the flip side, will say, I didn't do that. I don't have anything to do with that. And they learn to lie because the parent punishes them if they do admit. So to avoid that, it is important to hear the child and say, instead of saying, you lied, you get punished. No. What you need to say is, I appreciate you were honest, and because of that, I will not do anything to hurt you or punish you or give you a consequence, whatever means you want to say. Another thing is healthy families express emotions. They allow the child to emote. They don't knock him down. They don't say, what are you crying so much? They insist that I want to hear you. I want to hear what you have to say. And they enjoy the communication between both each other. They enjoy that connection because emotions are part of connecting. When you emote and you have feelings towards one another, you connect stronger. So if a child is crying, then the mother is trying to calm him down. There's a connecting factor there. Instead of being angry at the person, or even with a spouse, if there's a lot of emotions, if the parent, one of the spouses will say, I need to hear you. I really want to hear you. I love you. I care about you. I really want to hear what you have to say. But I can't hear you when you're so upset and so emoting too much. There are ways to say it to a point where the other party will hear you and listen to you. So emotions need to be expressed. Many times you'll see that based on a maladaptive behavior, the child has learned not to emote, and then again the parent will grow up, the person will grow up in the future and have a relationship and completely numb, doesn't want to emote, is afraid of emoting because that sound may make them very weak. And that's important to understand. One needs to be vulnerable in order to have a relationship, in order to have some kind of bonding with another person. But you need to trust the other person. You can't just take that risk. It is a risk. However, you need to be able to trust that other person. That's important. So when you trust the other person and you're able to be vulnerable, you connect on a very strong level. Without that vulnerability, you cannot really have a bonding. Healthy families build each other up. They don't put each other down in front of each other either. They are grateful. They talk about what their positive aspects are. I have told parents, if you could write things every week what your children do that are good, instead of focusing on the negative points, negative bias, then you will learn to appreciate them much more. I even told couples to do that with their spouses. I want you to write something positive about your spouse every day. And at first they said, well, I don't know what to say. I'm sure you'll find something, the smallest thing you can build up. And read it when you feel very low or very disconnected to your spouse. Being able to feel gratification is very vital for one's mental health. And I had a case where a woman was very depressed and she had a lot of sorrows, troubles in her family. And I asked her to do this, to write a gratifying journal. And she said she started to write things that she appreciated the sun and she appreciated the flowers and the leaves. And I was amazed. I couldn't believe it. She actually appreciated that her washing machine worked, that her floor was clean, things like that. It just blossomed. She was a different person. It's important also for parents to be on the same page in regard to discipline. It's very important that the parents know where they're going. Now, it's difficult to have this all at the same time, because if the parent is fighting with the other parent, you don't want to do that in front of the children. The children don't want to hear that mommy and daddy don't get along all the time, and they're always fighting about who should go to sleep when. The parents should really decide beforehand if they can. It's not always feasible, I understand that. But if it's not feasible, you need to work on that, because the child will play one parent against the other. They will go to one parent and say, Daddy said I could stay up, and then the other parent, Mommy said I could stay up. And the parent is lost because he said no and she said no. So this can be very manipulating. It's important to have boundaries. Boundaries are vital. Just like we have physical boundaries, like we have doors that close up the room that you cannot enter without knocking, there are people who have boundaries, emotional boundaries, that this is where this is my limit. I can't do this anymore. Or I can't shop anymore, I'm just exhausted. These are boundaries one has to make, or time frames, or whatever disciplinary issues you want to develop. These are all important points that bring up a family to become attuned and a healthy attachment for them to grow up into very functional families. Again, there are functional families have dysfunctional patterns, but if there's a will, there's a way to improve those behaviors, understanding that family of origin has a tremendous mark on the family and the children's development.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Very
much.
good.